Okay, so I'm guessing this video will suffice for the acetyl or the ANS receptor PowerPoint since you didn't post it. So in this 10 minutes, I'll go over everything in that one PowerPoint. So this PowerPoint for the ANS receptors, it's just talking about the ANS division of the central nervous system. Of course, the central nervous system divides into the PNS, and the PNS divides into the ANS, and the ANS stands for Autonomic Nervous System, which means you can't control what the ANS does. So the ANS is the autonomic nervous system, can't really control what it does, and its results can either be inhibitory or stimulatory. So it can stimulate a muscle, cause it to react or contract, or can inhibit a muscle and stop a reaction. And you can't control the ANS. Now you also have the somatic nervous system, which isn't really talked about a lot, and this is your muscles that you can voluntarily control, being mostly just your skeletal muscles, because you can't control anything else. The autonomic nervous system you can't control, that's your heart, your smooth muscle, everything you can't control. So these are the two divisions, autonomic and somatic. So somatic controls is voluntary, autonomic is inhibitor, you can't control it. Now since the somatic is everything you can control for your muscles, it's always excitatory. So that's just one thing you have to know. Spelled it wrong already, but an autonomic is excitatory. It always has a positive impulse because you're always contracting muscles if you're using it. Autonomic can be excitatory or it can be inhibitory. And you can see that as when your heart's beating, obviously it's excitatory, but if you want, if you're holding your breath, that's an inhibitory because you can't control those muscles, technically. So it can be inhibitory or excitatory. Now, the ANS mostly uses the transmitters acetylcholine, which everyone has heard of, I'm sure, at this point. Uses acetylcholine and epinephrine, and also norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is mostly mostly similar to epinephrine in this class. So it can be either acetylcholine or it can be epinephrine. Those are the two neurotransmitters of the ANS. And now the different pathways of the ganglion, about the receptors that he shows, is just a diagram. You can get this diagram online, but pretty much a neuron is, in simplest terms, broken down to two, they call ganglions. So two ganglions, and that's the ANS. Whereas the SNS is just one long ganglion. And this is what the action potential travels upon, or how many connections it has. Kind of like a highway. Like this is one long highway. Say this is a highway and intersect, or this is a road and interstate and a road. It's just different paths that it travels. This is called the preganglion, and this is called the postganglion. Very simple. It's pre, it's before, it's after, and this is just one long ganglion. Now the SNS SNS always releases acetylcholine and just travels down. Now the preganglions always also release acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is the first one that reacts in both of them, whether it's the SNS or it's in the ANS. So acetylcholine always travels in the preganglion. And also any neuron that sends acetylcholine is called cholinergic. And very important to know the difference between cholinergic and adrenergic, which we're about to go over. Cholinergic neuron is one that always releases acetylcholine. So in this case, this will be a cholinergic because it releases acetylcholine. The preganglions always release acetylcholine, no exception. This is also cholinergic because it releases acetylcholine. You can just deduce it, critical thinking, releases acetylcholine, and must be cholinergic. So this is always cholinergic. Now, postganglion can either release acetylcholine, or it can release epinephrine or norepinephrine. Has the options. So these are the different reactions, and also if it releases epinephrine and norepinephrine, it's called adrenergic. So cholinergic always releases acetylcholine, thus it's the preganglion, or it's this one, because it releases acetylcholine. Adrenergic always releases epinephrine or norepinephrine. So those are the two main things, cholinergic and adrenergic. So acetylcholine is always released from cholinergic, epinephrine is always released from adrenergic or norepinephrine. and thus the preganglionic, it must be cholinergic because it always releases acetylcholine. And now for the different types of receptors. So you have the ANS, a little space, a synapse, and then you have a receptor, or we're just going at the end of the muscle. And then you have a receptor, and then it causes the reaction, acts on whatever gland it's acting on. Remember, the preganglionic always releases acetylcholine, thus it's cholinergic. This either releases acetylcholine or epinephrine or norepinephrine, and if it releases epinephrine or norepinephrine, it's adrenergic. Now, depending on what receptor is at the end of the muscle, depends on if the effect is inhibitory or excitatory. If we'll use this one as an example for cholinergic fiber, a cholinergic has two receptors. Either the receptors are called musiconic, can't pronounce them. One receptor is called musiconic or nicotonic. So just know those two types of receptors, either musiconic or nicotonic. And this is what acetylcholine reacts on. Either of these receptors, either it's a nicotonic receptor or a musiconic receptor. A nicotonic receptor mean like these two receptors determine if the impulse, the action will either be inhibitory reaction, this will inhibit the muscle, stop the reaction, or be an excitatory, it will excite the muscle, cause the reaction to keep happening. Now, if acetylcholine binds to a nicotonic receptor, the reaction, whatever the reaction is, will always be stimulatory. So it will always cause a positive reaction, a stimulatory reaction. If it binds to a musiconic reaction, the reaction could either be stimulatory or inhibitory. It could be one or the other. You don't know. It can be either or, stimulatory or inhibitory. So it depends what receptor reacts on. Now remember, cholinergic always releases acetylcholine. That's just the preganglion, whatever. And on the postganglion, let's say it's releasing epinephrine or norepinephrine. That means it must be adrenergic since it's releasing those neurotransmitters. And this can either react. These don't react on a musiconic or nicotonic. These react on either alpha receptors or beta receptors. And there's multiple alpha receptors. There's 2 alpha receptors and 3 beta receptors. So there's 2 alpha receptors and there's 3 beta receptors. And with the adrenergic, it gets a little complicated. What it means is the alpha classes usually have a higher affinity to norepinephrine, so they prefer norepinephrine. So whenever your body releases norepinephrine, most likely it's going to be binding to an alpha class over a beta class. And thus, beta prefers epinephrine. This is important to know because that can be a simple definition question, like what does a beta receptor prefer? It prefers epinephrine, and alpha prefers norepinephrine. And depending on what it reacts on, it doesn't matter what receptor it acts on, norepinephrine or epinephrine can either be stimulatory or inhibitory regardless of what receptor it reacts on. The receptors only matter which one it prefers to react on, with norepinephrine preferring to act on the alpha receptors and epinephrine preferring to bind to the beta receptors. So now to do a quick review, we have the preganglionic receptor. Remember, it always comes first. This is always a cholinergic receptor, because remember, cholinergic receptors always release acetylcholine, and thus by nature it has to be a cholinergic receptor if it releases acetylcholine. Always releases one for the ANS. And then you have your little break, whatever, and then you have your postganglion receptor. Now the postganglion receptor can either be cholinergic or adrenergic, depending on what it releases. It can either release acetylcholine or it can release epinephrine or norepinephrine. If it releases acetylcholine, it has to be cholinergic. If it releases epinephrine or norepinephrine, it has to be adrenergic. And thus these can react on different receptors. Acetylcholine can react on either a musiconic receptor or a nicotonic receptor. If it reacts on a nicotonic receptor, it has to be stimulatory. If it reacts on a musiconic, it can be either or. The way I remember it easy is if a nicotine is a stimulant, because it's a stimulant, it speeds up your heart rate. That's how I think of it. So acetylcholine thus is stimulatory when it acts on nicotonic. Muscarinic, it's either stimulatory or inhibitory. Epinephrine or norepinephrine can bind to beta receptors or alpha receptors. Either alpha or beta. Alpha receptors prefer norepinephrine. Beta receptors prefer epinephrine. There's 3 beta receptors, 2 alpha receptors. Regardless of what receptor it's acting on, the response can either be stimulatory or inhibitory. Now to do something, since the somatic nervous system is just one ganglion, and it's one ganglion, and somatic is always excitatory or stimulatory because you always stimulate your muscles. Even if you contract your muscles, you're stimulating the opposite muscle to it, so you're contracting it. So it's stimulatory. Now, if it's always stimulatory, what reaction always causes a stimulus? Epinephrine or norepinephrine can be either or. Muscarinic can be either or, but acetylcholine always causes a stimulatory reaction when it acts on a nicotinic receptor. So, using that reasoning, the somatic nervous system ganglion has to release acetylcholine to be a stimulatory every single time. What releases acetylcholine? Cholinergic receptors. So, somatic nervous system has to be using the cholinergic receptors because it releases acetylcholine. It releases acetylcholine because it's always stimulatory. I don't know if that's a question, but that's critical thinking questions. And the last question was just asking what is parasympathetic and sympathetic. Parasympathetic is essentially a rest and digest, they call it. Anything that slows down your system to conserve energy. Just think of what conserves energy. Does this waste energy in the system, or does this use energy, or does this conserve energy? If it conserves energy, it's probably parasympathetic. And that will be slowing down your heart rate, slowing down your breathing, sleeping, widening your eyes, or constricting your eyes, because it takes less energy. And sympathetic will be anything that takes more energy or prepares your body to fight. Essentially, it's called the fight system, fight and flight. So that can be raising your heart rate, sending more blood to your muscles, dilating your eyes, with the theory that when you dilate your eyes, you're more ready to fight, in the mood to fight. But this is also sympathetic and parasympathetic is also gone over in another section, so you already have those PowerPoints. Okay. And if you like everything in this video, I have a study guide also posted. It's posted with this. So if you like it, just get the study guide, whatever. It's the same teachings, same everything, and just post any questions you have on the page and I'll answer them.